Beautiful. Walking in Memphis, that's Mark Cohn. We're talking about PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. And I think most of us probably over the years, decades, have probably become aware of it through the armed forces and ex-service personnel talking about suffering from PTSD after coming back from war zones. But it's much bigger than that, it now turns out. And the police are talking today about their officers being exposed to traumatic experiences and how that is processed and the pressures on them. But it goes across lots of different jobs, lots of different ways of life. Let's talk to Andy, who was in the armed forces in the Royal Electrical Mechanical Engineers for 3 years and then the fire service in Greater Manchester for 30 years. And he developed PTSD after being at some pretty horrendous incidents during his time in the fire service, and says he went on to have a breakdown in the late 90s. I'm glad you're good now, Andy. How did you cope with those traumatic situations, which you must have seen time after time after time after time on a day-to-day basis? It presumably eventually just got too much.
Yeah, hi Janet.
Hello.
Yeah, thankfully I am very well now, but it's taken a very, very long time to get to this wonderful place called recovery.
Yeah.
Back in the late 80s, when I was a young firefighter in Greater Manchester, I attended a number of particularly horrendous incidents, fatal incidents, which set me off. And I didn't cope very well back then because I had no outlet at all. Back then, the fire service didn't have any debriefing systems in place, so I had no way to talk about.
Hard to imagine now, isn't it? Now we know what we know.
Yeah, things are changing thankfully now. But back then there were no debriefs after incidents. You were left to your own devices, and as one of your callers mentioned earlier, the dark sense of humour, people sitting around the coffee table, telling bad jokes about what we've seen, what we've done. That was what basically happened in the service. But also having no outlet outside of that. I mean, my first wife, the lovely lady that I was married to at the time back then, she found it very difficult to cope with the idea that I was doing a very dangerous job. So in her mind, she made up this story that every time I went to work, I was in a nice, safe office. So when I came home and had a particularly bad shift, I wasn't able to talk to her about that because she felt she couldn't handle that. Yeah. So I had no way of getting my feelings out in the open and dealing with that in a logical and rational manner. So I developed unhealthy coping strategies.
What were you doing? What would you say the symptoms were?
Well, my first symptom was I started having nightmares.
Yeah.
So every time I went to bed, every time I closed my eyes, I would see elements of these incidents which were very particularly upsetting and frightening. So I started staying up late and so try and make myself very, very tired so that I would just naturally fall asleep, but that didn't work. So then I started drinking, and that wasn't very helpful at all either. So then I started going out and getting very, very drunk and getting involved with some very unsavoury and self-destructive behaviours.
Yeah.
None of which I'll say openly on the air.
No, but also none of which you will not be the first person to do all that, Andy. It's a coping mechanism, isn't it? My father, I know, drank because he had PTSD from the war. I now believe. I've got no evidence for that now, and he's a long time gone. But yeah, I've seen it. It was probably the most common way to cope. Absolutely.
So that went on for a good 11, 12 years, going through that. And so I was trying to deal with my anxiety because I was having, by this time I was having flashbacks and panic attacks. And I was trying to deal with my anxiety by self-medicating through alcohol and distraction, which is where the unsavoury behaviour came into play, because I was trying to distract myself from the anxiety that was building up. Yeah. But then, of course, the next morning I would be waking up feeling particularly ill, hungover, but also with massive feelings of guilt for what I'd just been doing because, I was a family man. I was a married man, I had kids. So I was feeling particularly guilty about that, and then the depression started kicking in on top of the anxiety.
And what tipped it? What made it all too much? Because it sounded like that went on quite a long time before you must have become really ill and sought help.
Well, it did, because the thing was, it was pressure everywhere, because, say, people realised that I wasn't performing at work, and bosses were having a go, saying, you're useless, you're this, you're that, the next thing. There was pressure on my relationship at home, because I wasn't behaving particularly well there either. So I got to this state where I knew something wasn't right with me, but I didn't understand what it was, so I didn't know who to reach out to for help, and I got to the point where I just wanted it to end, so I attempted suicide.
Okay.
And I attempted it on several occasions, and thankfully I survived that, but,
did you get the help?
Yeah, because it took that extreme situation for me to eventually go to my doctor and say, I actually went to him initially with a bad back, because I had the physical symptoms of pain and all sorts of things to go with my emotional distress. So I went to the doctor to say I've got just to go get some painkillers for a bad back and whatnot, and I went to open my mouth to say that I've got a bad back, doctor, and I literally just fell apart in his office. So thankfully I had a very good GP who he offered me antidepressants, but I didn't want to go down that route. But he moved heaven and earth to get me a therapist.
Good.
Which is when I experienced my first series of cognitive behaviour therapy.
Right.
Which helps to a certain degree, but didn't get me to full health. But it got me to a point where I could carry on living and manage better and cope with it, and keep a lid on my symptoms, and go. Basically, I was going through the motions for several years at work, still in the fire service, but mostly functioning, trying to keep a lid on what I was living with.
You left eventually, though, didn't you?
Yes, I did. Well, I left. I was, let's say, forcibly retired.
Yeah.
Yeah, in 2013, it happened again. I was on an incident in the centre of Manchester, and we lost one of our guys.
Oh, gosh.
And that blew the lid off my illness again, and I couldn't cope again. So I came off work, booked sick. Went to my GP to see about getting back into therapy and stuff like that, and eventually the fire service terminated my employment due to my mental health issues.
Andy, I'm aware time is ticking away for us. We're heading towards the news at 2. I know you from there you struggled to get other work, didn't you? Because you had to be honest about your mental health issues, and that was a problem then. But there's a happy ending to this.
There is a happy ending.
You're now a mental health trainer for the armed forces, and better person to do it?
I'm a mental health first aid trainer for anyone that needs it.
Right.
I did eventually find the right combination of therapy and therapist. I got to full fitness. I haven't had any symptoms now for nearly 2 years. Because I work very hard on maintaining my well-being since I've got to full fitness, and now I deliver mental health first aid training for not just the armed forces community, but for organisations in all sectors, whether it be the private, the public sector, also for individuals as well.
Brilliant.
So helping others to get back to where I've got to.
And what would you say are the keys to helping people either not get to the state that you were in, or if they have, then getting out of it? What are the key things? We've heard from people today. There seems to be definitely something about talking about it, teamwork. People have talked about making jokes, dark sense of humour, but there's something about sharing it, isn't there?
There is. The thing with anxiety-based disorders, and PTSD is one of those things, is the biggest issue is avoidance. If we avoid our triggers, we will never ever get better. So we need to find a level of support that will enable us to face our fears, face our triggers, and deal with them, which is what EMDR treatment did for me in the end. And not to give up hope, to keep working. If the first sex therapy didn't work, give it a go again and again and again until you find the right combination. And for those that are trying to support, the biggest and best thing you can do is not be judgmental. You know, be there to be a shoulder to lean on, be a sounding board for them to bounce off. Yeah, but don't be judgmental about what they're going through, because unless you've been through it yourself, you cannot possibly hope to understand where they are.
That's such a good point, and it relates back to what I think Dave was saying, or Malcolm. Malcolm, who started off in the burglary, said it wasn't that bad compared to what somebody else has gone through. There's no comparisons, is there? Your own trauma is your own trauma.
Absolutely.
Doesn't matter what anyone else has been through.
So many variables. You know, what else has gone in your particular life, and also on the outside afterwards, how good is your particular support network? You know, so you cannot make direct comparisons between anybody, whether it be the armed forces, the emergency services, whether it's some poor person that's been raped, sexually abused, or even, you know, held up in a robbery or whatever.
Each trauma is their own. Andy, I've really enjoyed talking to you. I've enjoyed talking to everybody this hour. Some great conversations. I applaud your openness. Thank you so much for sharing that.